Welcome back. For those of you who are at home, we're in comfy chairs now. We've moved to South Court Auditorium, and so you're welcome, those of you out there. Here's the agreement. You have to stay awake, even though you're in comfy chairs, but we're glad to have this venue where we have a little bit more room. I had mentioned this morning that I've had the opportunity to do several events with the White House. I did one this week on seniors and health reform. I have not been at one where people took so many pictures of each other. So this must really be the cool place to be, so congratulations to you all. Yeah, you all like each other a lot. I think this is a good sign, given how many pictures that you're taking, so that's a good thing. I wanted to recognize a couple of people before we get started, and Don Blandon and I had a chance to talk over lunch when we were upstairs. Don is the President and Chief Executive Officer of Investor Protection Trust. You know, this work kind of up to this point and moving forward will take all of us. And Don and his staff and his association have been focusing on education and will continue to work with us. And it sounded like from our conversation at lunch, you, like everybody else, has a whole long list of ideas on ways that we can work together and use kind of the things we've announced this morning, all of the ideas that have been presented. So thank you for your work with us so far. And I think the coordinating council that we announced this morning, the Secretary announced, gives us some structure so that we can talk specifically about what do we do with education, what do we do with prosecution, which is the focus this afternoon. So I just want to give a shout out to Don, and also thank you for feeding us, because this makes this day much, much easier to do as well. So he was able to help us keep you here, because when you leave, getting back through security just doesn't work. So we're very glad to have you. The Secretary made the announcement this morning about funding announcements available through HHS. The HHS news release has now been published. We have, I think, copies of it out front. The funding announcement is now live. So we made this announcement, and it's now on the streets. I'm looking for things for you all to tweet, because I don't know how many, 140 characters. You can get that in that many characters, and just let people know that the funding announcement is out, and certainly pick this up. We're very excited about being able to make financial investments in developing best practices in elder abuse. So this afternoon, we will turn our attention to what we can do to respond to elder abuse, and have a wonderful panel. I want to continue to have questions come in, because we will take questions much we did this morning. For those of you here and live, the Twitter hashtag that we're using all day is Protect Seniors, so I would encourage you to go ahead and use it. And if you have a question already that you know about, kind of on the law enforcement vein, you can go ahead and send that to us now, and we'll keep them in the queue. So we'll start this afternoon with a video. I'd like to introduce that to you. This is courtesy of the Office of Victims of Crime in the Department of Justice. It's a video clip called Responding to Elder Abuse, What Community Corrections Should Know. And I'm going to move down so I can see it as well.
We have 5 new cases today.
Multidisciplinary teams, I think, become particularly important in cases of elder abuse, because these cases are often multidimensional, very complex.
And it is very apparent that this is criminal negligence.
We have adult protective services. We have community services through victim witness. We have a forensic team that at UCI, which is our county hospital. We have a forensic specialist in bruising. We have the financial abuse team. We have judges on board who assign protective orders, who know about conservatorship.
We all educate each other so that we know enough about each other's disciplines to be helpful to each other. We all feel like we're doing a better job, and we're able to do our jobs more quickly.
I realize that I don't have to reinvent the wheel, that I take care of the criminal justice part with the offender accountability, and that I can count on a trustworthy collaborative to take care of the other needs of the victim.
Having the collaborative opens the door to resources that we in probation may not even be aware of. So the collaborative is so important, because at that point, it's like you're almost a resource broker. You can ensure the victim's needs are being taken care of by the experts at any community resource. They can assess the victim. Their expertise is really needed in that arena. That frees us up to focus on the probationer. That way we can do our job.
Sometimes it may be overwhelming, sometimes it may be maddening, but if you begin to screen and assess for elder abuse, you will save someone's life. I guarantee you will save someone's life.
Thank you, Department of Justice. Okay, our first speaker this afternoon is Tony West, and we're so pleased he's here. He's the acting Associate Attorney General, and he was appointed to that position earlier this year. He was nominated by President Obama to be the Assistant Attorney General for the Justice Department's Civil Division back in January of 2009. As the person leading the Civil Division, quite naturally, you can kind of assume correctly what he's been focusing his time on: civil enforcement efforts on healthcare fraud, mortgage fraud, procurement fraud, other civil actions with regard to taxpayer money lost to fraud, and really been working to emphasize the role of the Department of Justice in protecting us and supporting consumers through the enforcement of consumer protection laws. We were pleased to have Justice here with us all morning and are glad to see Tony West. I think you're like the third highest person at Justice. So we're getting everybody, and we'll meet the Attorney General too. We know he's in Canada. So Mr. West, thank you for coming with us today.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Kathy, thank you for that introduction, and not only for that, but for your leadership and the leadership of the Department of Health and Human Services, all that you all are doing to provide on all the help that you're providing to meet the needs of our nation's aging populations. I also want to say thank you very much for having me here. This is, I've heard what a great morning you've had. This commemoration gets better and better every year. I had the good fortune of being able to participate in the first one a couple of years ago over at HHS, and I'm so pleased to be able to be back again for this one. I also want to thank our moderator for this afternoon's panel, and also a colleague of mine at the Department of Justice, Andy Mao. Andy's not only been, of course, a force in helping to organize today's event, but he has an unwavering commitment to combating elder abuse and financial exploitation. I had the very good fortune of working with him closely when I was in the Civil Division, and he focused like a laser beam on these issues. And so, Andy, thank you so much for all that you've done. You know, it's been about 35 years since Hubert Humphrey reminded us that the measure of a society is taken by the way we treat those who are in the dawn of life, those who age in the twilight of life, and those who persevere in the shadows of life. And often, all too often, those in life's twilight are also suffering in life's shadows. You know, ours is a society that is rapidly aging. Within roughly the next decade and a half, more than 72 million Americans will be over the age of 65. It's nearly 20% of the entire population, according to the Administration on Aging. And for a culture that celebrates youth, I think this fact presents us with particular challenges and important questions, not the least of which is how will we ensure that those in life's twilight will receive the dignity, the respect, the quality care that they deserve. I think that part of the answer lies in our recognizing in an honest and open way and discussing in an honest and open way the real but underreported problem of elder abuse. As Acting Associate Attorney General, I oversee much of the Justice Department's efforts to protect seniors from financial exploitation, from age discrimination, and from health care fraud. And while I believe we've made some very significant improvements over the years when it comes to our ability to recognize and respond to elder abuse, unfortunately, I fear that the tragedy is still far too prevalent. Victims are often too ashamed to come forward, particularly when the perpetrator is a family member or someone who's close to them. Even today, nearly 30 years after the United Nations World Assembly recognized elder abuse as a human rights issue, we still find that there persist deeply disturbing cases of neglect. Like the case that we at the department pursued in Rome, Georgia, against a man named George Hauser. the owner of 3 nursing homes. Hauser billed Medicare and Medicaid for about $32 million in services that completely failed to meet basic standards of care. Hauser spent that money on furniture, vacations, fancy cars, real estate investments, but even more significant than his financial fraud against the American taxpayers was his deplorable neglect of the residents in his nursing home. Hauser's failure to maintain adequate staffing levels meant that those nursing home residents were unable to receive the assistance that they needed to dress themselves, to feed themselves, even to clean themselves. Patients went hungry. Bedridden residents went unmoved. Bed linens, soiled with human waste, went unchanged. One family member that we spoke to, she found her aunt suffering in one of Hauser's homes from dehydration and malnutrition. A treating physician who later treated her discovered and removed a cockroach that had burrowed deep in the elderly woman's ear. A nurse from another nursing home who had been called in to assist when Hauser's employees, most of them had left, described her shock when she found another resident who was bedridden, covered from her neck to her feet in little black bugs. The woman's eyes were matted shut because they had not been cleaned. Now, traditionally, those of us in law enforcement, we look at a case like this, and we would treat it as a typical law enforcement problem. We would see it as a healthcare fraud that requires a recovery for the taxpayer or a criminal neglect that demands individual accountability. And that is, I think, an appropriate response. Indeed, last February, Hauser was convicted on 11 counts of healthcare and tax fraud, or for conspiring to commit healthcare and tax fraud, and he now faces a maximum sentence of over 50 years in prison. So I think the traditional law enforcement approach is definitely appropriate. But what we at the Justice Department recognize, and I think what all of us here appreciate, is that while that traditional law enforcement response is appropriate and necessary, it is not alone sufficient. We must do more. We must engage in a multidisciplinary approach like the one we saw in the film we just watched that helps us to identify elder abuse earlier, helps us to stop it more quickly, helps us to prevent it from occurring in the first place. And in this regard, I think we are making some very important strides. First, we're collecting data to raise awareness and bolster prevention efforts. Through our Office of Justice Programs, the Justice Department has funded a wide range of cutting-edge research on the signs and characteristics of elder abuse, on bruising, on neglect and financial exploitation, and the characteristics of individuals who fall victim to that. In fact, earlier this week, the department released a report on the violent physical and sexual abuse of the elderly. It's a hidden epidemic. The majority of it takes place during the isolated hours, the nighttime and evening nursing home hours, and is often undetected, occurs often at the hands of someone the victim actually knows. Second, we are supporting the training of hundreds of police officers and judges around the nation on elder mistreatment, as well as hundreds of local prosecutors on how to develop effectively and prosecute successfully elder abuse cases. Because timely, certain, and consistent enforcement action against elder abuse, that is an essential ingredient as well to our overall success. But third, and equally important, I think, through the Department's Elder Justice Initiative, through our Office for Victims of Crime, and our Access to Justice Initiative, we're funding and facilitating the training of a wide range of professionals to work with law enforcement in connection with identifying and responding to victims of elder abuse. Professionals like the ones we saw, victim service providers, healthcare practitioners, adult protective service workers, And with the Missing Link project that the Deputy Attorney General announced this morning, civil legal aid providers. It's an important step toward helping to ensure that when victims seek help, they'll be met with dignity, they'll be met with assistance, they'll be met with respect. So as we continue to bring our law enforcement tools to bear, to investigate, to prosecute, and to punish elder abuse, we at the department also know that the most effective elder abuse case is the one we prevent from occurring in the first instance. And to do that, we must continue to work together. We must continue to build networks together. We must continue to collaborate and combine resources and information and areas of expertise. We all know this work is not easy, but we also know that there are so many people depending on us, especially those who suffer in silence, those who are unable to speak for themselves. They're depending on us to do this work and to do this work well. And I know that we will not let them down. So thank you very much for having me. It's a real privilege.
Thank you very much, Acting Associate Attorney General West. Let's have the next panel come up. You can either jump or here's a ramp. So I'll have you come up. This afternoon's panel will operate much like this morning's, where we'll have presentations and then take questions from the audience as well as people who are sending in questions through Twitter. Our moderator this afternoon, Mr. West already referred to, Andy Mao, is Senior Counsel for Healthcare Fraud and Elder Justice in the Civil Fraud Division, Department of Justice. Those of us who have been working on planning the day have gotten to know each other well. Andy has been quite active in the planning from the DOJ perspective as we've put together the day. He also, in his capacity at Department of Justice, advises the Civil Division on policy matters relating to healthcare fraud and coordinates activities on elder financial exploitation through the department's Elder Justice and Nursing Home Initiative. So, Andy, this is your panel, so come on up.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. When my father and I used to play tennis long ago, we would have a little tradition of basically preemptively throwing out all of our excuses. My back hurts, my elbow hurts, I was staying up too late studying, or things like that, or not. So let me throw out mine, and that is that right before this panel, I had a big cup of coffee. Now, I know everyone has a little coffee, and that's fine, but I am a fast talker from New Jersey, which means that giving me coffee before public speaking is probably not the wisest thing to do. So forgive me for that. Almost every speaker this morning and this afternoon has talked about the importance of greater collaboration in order to develop a strategic response to preventing elder abuse. Responding to elder abuse and financial exploitation is no different. It requires a significant amount of coordination and collaboration at the local level among law enforcement, the medical community, APS workers, ombudsmen, and of course the financial community. It also requires a significant amount of coordination and collaboration vertically among the local governments, state governments, and the federal governments. And I think today's announcement of the Elder Justice Coordinating Council is a critical first step towards cementing those relations among all the different levels of government. Today's really phenomenal panel has representatives from every link in that vertical chain. Because I usually like to know what I'm about to hear, let me just give you sort of a spoiler. We'll be talking about how each level of government responds. We'll also be talking about where we, as representatives of each level, can see potential areas of collaboration. I think it's time to start moving, and I think this panel will hopefully identify some of those areas where we can all do better in working together. Our first panelist is Dr. Mark Lax. He's a professor of medicine and the co-chair of the Division of Geriatrics and Gerontology at Weill Medical College. He's the director of the Cornell University Center on Aging Research. He's also the director of the New York City Elder Abuse Center. And it's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Lax.
Thank you. Thank you. So What an honor to be here. And as a fast-talking New Jerseyite, I'm a fast-talking New Yorker, so that's even worse. So I fashioned my remarks about elder abuse and financial exploitation, kind of using the three hats that I've worn in elder abuse. The first is as a scientist, as someone who's been funded by NIH and NIJ for 25 years now, trying to understand the epidemiology of this problem. The second, and perhaps most important, is as a doctor who provides primary care to older adults. And let me tell you, that's hard even without abuse and neglect and exploitation sort of superimposed. And the third is as director of the New York City Elder Abuse Center. And this builds terrifically on Mr. West's comments about collaboration, because New York has been creative in responding to this epidemic in a collaborative way. So first, the science. I use the word epidemic. I'm an epidemiologist. It's not a word that I use trivially. Last year, collaboratively, we completed a prevalence study in New York State, one of the largest ever conducted in the world, of 4,000 New Yorkers, rural, urban, upstate, downstate. And in the past year, 7% of them said they had been abused in some fashion. The most common form of abuse was financial exploitation. 4%, or 1 in 25, financial exploitation. Now, I would submit to you that if there were an infectious disease or cancer or other medical problem that afflicted 1 in 25 Americans, okay, the CDC would be called. It would be a public health emergency. There would be surveillance officers in every major city. It would be on the front page of the New York Times. It's an epidemic. And the infectious disease metaphor is a good one because it is contagion. Those who are victims of mistreatment become impoverished, and they infect our other systems of social welfare. They become Medicaid recipients. It is contagion financially provoked by elder abuse and neglect. Let me put on my doctor hat for a second and talk a little bit about this problem. Look, it's terrible to be a physical elder abuse victim. It's awful, and I see those patients, but let me make two comments in that regard. The first is I'm going to channel my friend Liz Lowy, who's here today, the ADA from New York City, and say that rarely do I see a serious case of physical elder abuse, a murder. I'm going to testify in one next week in a criminal trial. That does not in some way begin or involve financial exploitation. It is a gateway drug, if you will, to this problem. It's just very, very problematic. And I would also point out that physical abuse, while intolerable, is much rarer than financial exploitation. Okay, much rarer than financial exploitation. So what has been the medical response to this? I'm sorry to say that my physician colleagues have been somewhat asleep at the wheel. I look at my pediatrician colleagues. The pediatric movement for child abuse is one of the greatest stories of social advocacy by physicians for a cause in the history of American medicine. I mean, if you look at pediatric textbooks, you see this directly alongside pediatric infectious diseases, rickets. You see child abuse. They have been indoctrinated. Not so with regard to elder abuse and physicians who care for older adults. There have been a few bright spots. My dear colleague, Dr. Laura Mosqueda, who spoke this morning, you've seen her multidisciplinary teams. We have one in New York. That work is fantastic. I think the work of the Investor Protection Institute, the work that Bob Rausch and Don Blandin are doing, trying to educate physicians around financial vulnerability of older adults is really, really remarkable. I mean, we tend to think of these sessions, and it's somewhat artificial. The morning is about prevention, and the afternoon's about intervention. Well, I have news for you. The best way, we just heard it, to thwart off elder abuse is for it not to have occurred. And I like the bedsore analogy, right? I teach my medical residents at Cornell the best way not to treat a bedsore is not to get one in the first place. And we've developed scales, instruments, Braden, Norton, many of you in the room know them, that determine at risk for pressure ulcers. In the same way, these guys have developed ways of determining risk for financial vulnerability and exploitation. So that is a very promising development. And now I'd like to talk a little bit about the New York City Elder Abuse Center. Look, the reasons that that older adults get financially exploited is complex and multifactorial. It's never one thing in geriatric medicine. It's a combination of cognitive frailty, physical frailty, a drug-addicted adult child, mental illness in the family. And to think that one provider in one silo is going to be able to fix this is simply nuts. It's simply nuts. We need to work together. It does take a village. And the truth is, our New York City Elder Abuse Center are a group of grassroots providers, physicians, housing, social workers, NGOs, governmental agencies, police, from all corners of New York who sit together on a regular basis and hear the city's most difficult cases. There are dozens. A few months ago, a young APS worker presented a 90-year-old woman referred from a case management agency. Her daughter had access to her brokerage accounts and to her bank accounts. Instead of using the money for this diabetic woman for insulin and home care and home attendance, she diverted it to buy heroin. We were so concerned when we heard the case presented that we had Protective Services go right then and there to the home, where she found the older woman on the ground, quite ill. From there, she went directly to the emergency department, where the emergency department sadly did their thing, patched her up, rehydrated her, and said, it's time to go home now, back to that environment. Credit to the Adult Protective Service professional. She got on the phone and called us back, and one of our docs got on the phone with one of the emergency room docs, doc to doc, and said, not happening. That woman now lives with her cognition, her dignity, her resources in an assisted living facility. She is not a Medicaid recipient because of that intervention, because of the communication, because of multidisciplinary collaboration. You know, rarely do I get, thank you. We who work in multidisciplinary teams want to work with the financial community in a number of different ways. And it's rare that I get an opportunity to address so many people from the financial services and banking industry. Look, you who have come today are enlightened. I'm sort of preaching to the choir. I'm very mindful of the risks you take in trying to protect your clients. Choosing to dig deeper, to look under the rug, as opposed to looking the other way, could invoke the fury of that client or a family. It might involve some regulatory risk to you, okay? I'm well aware that client may fire you and find some other investment advisor who's very happy not to look under the rug, not to drill down, but you are truly, truly serving the fiduciary interest of that individual, okay? So good for you, and I look forward to a day when this is standard in the industry. It'll be like, how did we have cars without seatbelts in 20 or 30 years from now, or even sooner, I should hope. Thank you. In closing, my favorite course in medical school is a course called pathophysiology, and for those of you who are not in the medical field, it's how diseases occur and cause suffering. So in pneumonia, how bacteria get into the lung and produce an infection and shortness of breath, okay? We need the investment community's help, not only in providing service, but understanding the science. We can understand the pathophysiology of loss of capacity, of undue influence. I work with neuroscientists and functional imaging experts who can help older adults by understanding who's vulnerable from an evidence-based scientific standpoint. It's just remarkable. You know, as an internist, I'm really good at blood pressure. I'm really good at hypertension. I can adjust someone's insulin. I play with their blood pressure medications, and they come back and they're appreciative. When I extricate someone from a situation of financial exploitation, that is an out-of-the-park home run. We need your help. You need our help. The older population that built and maintained this great society deserves nothing less. Thank you very much, Andy.
Our second panelist is Paige Ulrey. She is the Senior Deputy Prosecuting Attorney from the Prosecutor's Office in Seattle, Washington. She has been prosecuting elder abuse cases since 2001 and financial exploitation cases since 2007. Please help me welcome Paige Ellery.
Good afternoon. I am one of 2 full-time attorneys dedicated to the prosecution of felony-level elder abuse cases in my office. I specifically focus on the prosecution of elder financial exploitation and neglect cases. In the 10 years I've been doing this work, I have seen firsthand the ravages of elder abuse, and more recently, in the past 5 or so years, the ravages of financial exploitation on these victims. Our colleague, Candace Heisler, calls the exploitation of elders financial violence, and that is, in my experience, a very apt description. Many victims of these crimes have not only lost most or all of their life savings, but they have also suffered a betrayal by someone they trusted and often loved. And the loss of assets combined with that betrayal has a profoundly damaging effect on anyone, but especially on someone who is compromised already by disease or dementia or loneliness. Rarely do we end up going to trial in my office on a financial exploitation case where we have a victim who is actually available and able to testify. Because usually our victims become very seriously ill or die after they learn of the exploitation. This past year, I prosecuted a case involving the financial exploitation of 5 elderly clients by their banker's life agent, a woman named Jasmine Kasim. Jasmine Kasim selected 5 of her most vulnerable clients, and for months she groomed them for the exploitation. She groomed them by visiting them frequently, by eating meals with them, by showing how concerned she was for them, by confiding in them, by sharing her personal life with them. After fully gaining their trust, she told them their annuities had matured and that it was time for them to reinvest those annuities. So completely did these people trust her that they each simply put their signatures on their personal checks and gave them to her to reinvest the money. Kasim completed these checks in the names of actually her daughters and deposited them in 2 accounts she created in her daughters' names. She then proceeded to withdraw the money and for the next couple of years lived off of that money, lived an incredibly lavish lifestyle, including frequent trips, dining out at expensive restaurants, shopping sprees, online psychics, everything you can think of. In total, she stole over $1 million from these 5 people. My office filed multiple counts of felony theft against Kasim for her actions. After we filed those charges, we took a deposition of each of the victims in order to preserve their testimony in case we lost them before we went to trial. 2 of those victims are Carmen Pasqua and Michael Wispinski. From Carmen Pasqua, Kasim took 6 checks totaling over $424,000, all of the money she had saved during her long career working at Boeing. From Michael Wispinski, Kasim took 9 checks totaling $352,000, leaving him with virtually nothing. Michael and Carmen are still alive, and they have given me their permission to show you excerpts of their depositions that they gave in this case, with the hope that they might play some small part in preventing these crimes from occurring to someone else in the future.
At any point when you knew Jasmine, did she ask you for money?
No, she don't asking me any penny.
Did she ever ask you for a loan?
No.
Okay.
Even my house, she loaned my house. She don't even say anything, nothing.
If she had asked you for money, would you have given it to her?
No.
What about for her daughters? Did
No.
she ever? Okay.
I don't even see her daughter again.
Do you know how much money Jasmine took from you?
A lot. I don't know how many check that one. 7 check or 8?
6 checks.
6 check.
Did you ever talk to Jasmine about this?
No.
Do you know how much money you have left at Banker's Life?
I don't know how much left there in Bankers.
Okay. Can you tell us how this has affected you, what Jasmine did?
I'm so mad. Sometimes I cry, I have a headache. Adi, oh my God, I got a hard time to work, and then she kept all the money. What is that for? Oh my God. I said, my mind.
Do you have enough money left for your retirement now?
Nothing, I don't know. Just my pension, that's it.
I have no other questions.
I actually have no further questions.
So can you tell us what you do remember? How many checks do you remember writing to Jasmine Kasim?
I just remember writing one check to S.A. Sub. I think it was S.A. Sub, and that's all I remember.
And how much was that check for?
I think it was for $25,000.
And that was what you understood was going to be going to Chicago?
Well, that's what I understood, yeah.
Okay. Did you ever agree to write any checks to any of Jasmine's family members?
Oh, no, I don't remember writing any check to her family members.
What about to Jasmine herself? Did you ever write a check to Jasmine?
No, I never wrote any check in Jasmine's name, no.
Okay.
No.
Do you remember when the last time was that you saw her?
Oh, I don't remember. Well, the last time, I think it was when she took me out for dinner.
Okay. Do you know what the total amount of money is that was taken from you?
No, I don't. No, I don't.
Can you tell us how you've been affected by what happened to you?
Well, of course, it was a terrible shock to me because I trusted her, and it was really a disaster to me because then I started worrying about how I'm going to make my living or what will happen to me. So I didn't really want to think much about it.
Do you want to take a break, Mr. Wyspinski? Let's take a break.
Going off the record, the time is approximately 11:20.
I'm sorry.
I could think of no other way or more articulate way of describing for you what we're seeing than that video. Jasmine Kasim pled guilty to 10 counts of felony theft a couple of months ago. She received an exceptional sentence of 75 months, and she is now in prison. We were very lucky in this case that Bankers Life agreed to reimburse these victims for their losses. In the majority of our cases, our victims never see a penny of their money again. And at least in Washington state, victims' compensation funds are insufficient to provide any compensation for the losses suffered by these victims. These cases are difficult for us in the criminal justice system to investigate and prosecute because they involve analyzing financial and medical records. They involve issues of financial capacity, powers of attorney, guardianships, conservatorships, undue influence, and consent. None of those things are things they teach at the academy, and many of those things are not even taught in law school. To effectively investigate and prosecute a criminal case involving issues of this kind requires training and specialization. And yet across the country, the majority of jurisdictions do not have detectives and prosecutors who have this training and specialization. So without them, victims across the country and their families and reporters of these crimes are all too likely to hear that their case is civil, not criminal, and that there is nothing the justice system can do for them. In addition to trained and specialized detectives and prosecutors, we need experts in order to prosecute these cases. My office is one of the few prosecutors' offices that I know of that has a forensic accountant on staff, and she is absolutely vital to our ability to handle these cases successfully. In addition, we often need geriatricians, geriatric psychologists, and psychiatrists to conduct capacity evaluations of our victims so that we can determine whether and to what degree their capacity was impaired at the time these crimes occurred. And as Laura Mosqueda mentioned this morning, the mini mental status exam that is so often used in the field is massively inadequate to assess capacity for these purposes. Most prosecutors' offices in the country have no money for or access to any of these experts. And again, the result is that many of these cases are going uninvestigated and unprosecuted. We also need advocacy for victims of these crimes. Of the 39 police agencies that we get our cases from in King County, only one has an elder victim advocate. Our office itself has no advocates for victims of financial exploitation. Several years ago, I prosecuted a case where a man with advanced dementia was removed from his nursing home by his massage therapist. She then took him to the local courthouse, married him, and went directly for her honeymoon to the local Bank of America, where she attempted to withdraw all of his money. A very astute bank teller figured out what was going on, refused the transaction, and reported the situation to the police. The man's assets were saved, and the massage therapist was prosecuted. What we need from those of you in the financial services industry is training of your employees to recognize and report possible exploitation like this teller did. We need you to refuse transactions or freeze assets temporarily until law enforcement or APS has a chance to investigate. We need you to make it easier for us to obtain your records, because it's your records that are so essential for us to be able to prosecute these cases successfully. We need forensic accountants to conduct analysis of these records so that we can understand what happened and understand how we can prove these cases to the jury. And we need you on our multidisciplinary teams that bring our different disciplines together to discuss cases and how to improve our systemic response to this issue. I echo Dr. Lack's statement that we are in the middle of an epidemic. It is absolutely imperative that we come together across our many disciplines to seriously address this issue on both a local and a national level. Thank you.
Our next panelist is Ricker Hamilton. He is the director of the Office of Aging and Disability Services in the Maine Department of Health and Human Services. Since early 1980s, he has been a tireless worker on behalf of the elderly as well as persons with disabilities. He has been a member of various programs involving conservatorships, guardianships, as well as APS, and it's my great pleasure to introduce Mr. Hamilton.
Good afternoon. I was having a great afternoon until Assistant Secretary Greenlee mentioned all the photos that were taken and realized I wasn't in any. And I was recovering from that, but then they showed the video with some of my friends, and you heard my voice, but didn't see my face. So I guess this tall and handsome thing is gone by the way. So I apologize for that. As you heard from Andy, I've been working in the field of social work for 35 years, and I've been working in adult protective services since January 4th of 1982. To be here at the White House to talk about elder abuse is just an incredible honor. I cannot tell you how it feels for people to be in the field, to be here doing that. And the panel this morning, the announcements that were made are just over the moon. To think that we're going to have some resources to talk about the energy that was on the panel, the mention of representative payees, which is one of the largest unmet needs in this country, is just exciting for us. For the past 8 months at the Department of Human Services in Maine, what we've been trying to do is combine 2 large offices. And we were doing that because we wanted to have cooperation and communication more. So we combined the Office of Elder Services and the Office of Aging and Adults with Disability Services, and as Andy just said, the Office of Aging and Disability Services, to watch professionals from very different fields come together and to find commonality at each juncture was very, very exciting. And that's really what we're talking about today, isn't it? We're talking about having the same level of collaboration needed to address elder abuse. You'll hear that word a lot. It's not overused enough today because it's the only way that we get to address the needs of these older victims and at times persons with disabilities. Also, sadly, we know that these victims have various forms of abuse. So you and I may get involved in a case of financial exploitation, and if we're not careful, we may miss that they've been victims of emotional and psychological abuse. They have neglect. Sexual abuse is probably the most missed form of it all. So we can't laser in on just one form of abuse. We have to open our eyes, open our assessment, open to what we're listening to, and just know that there's co-occurring forms of abuse at times. I'd like to give you an example of that. In Maine, we had a case of an elderly woman who was isolated by one of her sons from the rest of the family members and was driven from Maine to Florida. All along the way, they utilized ATMs and banks, and he was financially exploiting his mother. Well, our good friends at a local bank noticed the difference in transactions and withdrawals and brought it to our attention. And we were able to get an administrative subpoena, and I'll mention that probably again, working with Adult Protective Services to protect financial institutions. Don't have to divulge much confidential information. Tell us that you have concerns. We'll work with you. We'll work with Adult Protective Services to do that. We did a great job with our partners in the financial institution in this case. We saved some of the funds. We were able to freeze the accounts, which is a fantastic tool. But we forgot one thing. We didn't keep our eyes open to other forms of abuse. And after we'd done all the things and thought we'd done a good job, it was only then, weeks later, that we noticed that this lady had a missing tooth. And when we asked what happened, her response was this. We had missed the physical abuse all along the way, and we missed the opportunity to intervene with her and to get the support she needed to do that. So we need to keep our eyes open and know that many of us who are older are suffering at the hands of different types of abuse as well. The solutions for all of our challenges surrounding elder abuse is in the room today. They're in our agencies, in our offices. If we truly focus on the victim and forget for a moment about all the barriers we see, the answers are right in front of us. We find ways to work with one another. Responding to elder abuse is not the responsibility, as you've just heard, of any one or two agencies. It is the mandate for all of us. Just like child abuse and domestic violence are forms of family violence that deserve a significant and unified community response, so does elder abuse. So we are asking for nothing more, but we're certainly not asking for anything less. Collaboration among agencies is the only thing that works. Many agencies are already addressing the needs of older victims and working hard to change policies, procedures, outreach programs, and shelters like Martha's Cottage in Maine are developed specifically to meet the needs of older women. And not surprisingly, we've found that when these women come into our shelter, that there are a lot of financial issues going on. They have no financial backing and don't know how to get it and have never dealt with finances. Outreach, increased public awareness, and joint efforts are effective tools. They're the only tools that seem to work for us. And also, the experience in Maine is a bit different than some other states. We're the oldest per capita than any other state in the country, and for 18 and younger, we have the smallest population. So when we talk about elder abuse at the Maine Criminal Justice Academy to the young cadets, and believe me, in the large auditorium, they all look like Doogie Howser to me now. But it's the same as Grand Rounds, sorry, doctor. When we talk about elder abuse, and I say to them that the likelihood of you being called to a home and discovering elder abuse is far greater than child abuse, they think sometimes my head's on sideways. Until they get out in the field and they've had their eyes opened, and they only get a portion of training in elder abuse that they do in domestic violence and child abuse, but they find it. So the young cadets are the ones that are points of change for us as well. And being a reserve police officer, that's what I specialize in for a certain police department, is to work with persons with disabilities, to work with older persons who may be presenting as difficult, not wanting to respond, when in fact there's some things we can do to intervene. The challenge for Adult Protective Services, and this is a big challenge, and keep in mind that's my professional experience. We have to be the most responsive and flexible and engaging partner in the community. And the challenge I'm giving you today is, if not, you hold us to that high standard. But I'm also going to ask you to learn about Adult Protective Services in your community, because we're very different in different counties and different states. There's different statutes, there's different policies and procedures. Oftentimes, I would make mistakes with my friends in the financial institution or with law enforcement, asking them to intervene in an elder abuse case and thinking that they weren't. I knew what they were supposed to do, and they weren't doing it. The challenge for us is to find out not only what we're empowered to do, what the statutes tell us to do, but also I need to understand, and we need to do as a community partners, what our limitations are. I may be asking or thinking that you can do something that you cannot. But there's the ways that we can work together. We mentioned confidentiality. There's ways that we can get around that. There's ways that you can report to APS. There's ways that we can respond that protect your confidentiality. If you don't have the tool like an administrative subpoena, we can talk about it. Get in contact with me. We'll find out what our statutes are. We'll work to do it. What happens in law enforcement when APS is involved is we're able to get medical records and bank records even sometimes before law enforcement could with their subpoena. But also within statutes in many, many states is the ability of Adult Protective Services to share what we've gathered with law enforcement, with our partners in prosecution as well. There are many models to look at, Oregon and Maine and Massachusetts for reporting for financial institutions. Find one that works for you. The one thing that I would say to you is it's great to have a program, but you have to have a way to sustain it. It's not great to have the frontline staff, the tellers to have cards, working with the managers to say slow the process down, because we all know that about elder abuse. Whether it's in an emergency department or in your bank, the thing that we need to do to slow down the perpetrators is to slow the process down. We need to talk to one another. We need to begin to look at this in a different way. Find a model that works for you. Tweak it. Make sure that it fits your community and your statutes. I have a couple of action steps that I'd like in closing to share with you. Review the statutes. I've already mentioned regulations to eliminate obstacles to reporting, investigating, and prosecuting cases. Make sure that we're working so that the prosecutors are getting cases that they can prosecute. Make sure that Adult Protective Services is working very closely with law enforcement so that evidence is protected. Make sure that we do that all along the way. And what a dynamic change it is when APS and law enforcement and medical people together go to a prosecutor with a case. It changes the whole dynamic of it. It's very supportive. And the likelihood of another case being prosecuted by that young DA is greatly increased as well. Develop a community plan with all of your community partners. Domestic violence, sexual assault, long-term care ombudsman. In Maine, I don't know what I would do without our long-term care ombudsman. APS, law enforcement, and our area agencies on aging. Work together to increase public awareness, cross-train opportunities, and support one another privately and publicly. When there's an opportunity for you to go to your state house and to support your community partners for resources or to talk about elder abuse, do it. If you're in the community and there's an opportunity for you to support Adult Protective Services, which may not get the recognition that it needs in our legislature, how powerful is that if you come with me to testify at those hearings? Because you and I are going to depend upon each other in the community. Let's support one another up in front of the legislators as well. Develop a protocol and a system that supports following the protocol. You can have great protocols, but you have to have an ability that you hold one another accountable to live to what we said we're going to do. People are counting on us. We lose more than our money in financial exploitation. We lose hope. We lose our independence. And you who have worked with victims the way as I have, when you look into a victim's eyes, it's that loss of hope. We don't want to see that. And also build sustainable community response that survives significant changes, whether it's an administrative change or significant partners within your community change. One of the best things, the Department of Justice funded the Maine Elder Death Analysis Review Team through the American Bar Association. It was a very small grant. I think it was around $5,000. In my professional career, the Maine Elder Death Analysis Review Team is the best multidisciplinary team that's ever happened. Law enforcement, all of the agencies coming together. We look at serious injury and death. I would encourage you to look at that. If you don't have it in your community, take a look at that. There are many of us who would help you to do it as well. In closing, I have a quote on my office wall. It's been there so long. In fact, when I changed jobs 9 months ago, I started to take pictures of it or write it down, and I decided to take the whole bulletin board. It also had my son's writings over the past 10 years, so I just couldn't part with it. But it really has been marching orders for myself, aside from stay client focused, which is a sign behind my desk. What this says is look back and remember. Remember how we got here. Remember what it's like. Remember what we're leaving from. Remember where we were when we developed our policies and procedures. All good things. But then look ahead as we're doing today, and if you don't get excited after today about elder abuse and what's going to happen in the future, change careers, because this is exciting stuff, guys. Is look ahead and imagine. Can you imagine what we could do for older victims in the future if we work together? If we stop saying this policy, I can't do this, and just put the client in the middle, it's very exciting. So look ahead and imagine. And the final line is look into your heart and honor elders and take action. I know there's troublemakers in this audience and troublemakers listening. We need a few. Take action, go out, stay client focused, and know from the panels this morning and the panels this afternoon and the people that are in the audience, there's plenty of us there to help, want to help, and can't believe and want to take the momentum that's developed today and take it back home and make a big difference. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Charles Harwood. He's the Deputy Director of the Consumer Protection Bureau at the Federal Trade Commission. For a number of years, he has led a number of educational and prosecutorial efforts, focusing on financial scams that affect the consumers as well as the elderly. So please help me welcome Charles Harwood.
Thank you, Andy. So I'm Charles Harwood, as Andy has said. I'm with the Federal Trade Commission. The Federal Trade Commission is a consumer protection agency. I have a few remarks I wanted to make today about protecting seniors and elders. I wanted to emphasize that these remarks are based on my experiences in 20-some years of consumer protection. While I think most of them reflect the views of the entire Federal Trade Commission, I didn't consult with them before I wrote them, so please understand that they're my comments. The FTC, we do a couple different things at the FTC, but one of the things that we do a lot of consumer and business education. We educate folks around the country about how to prevent frauds and scams. We educate businesses. The other thing that we do is we engage in law enforcement. We file cases. But in connection with both those activities, one of the main tools we use, one of the main things that we are proudest of at the FTC is our consumer complaint handling process. For the last 12 years, we have been engaged in building a new consumer complaint system, a very robust system that takes in complaints from consumers both directly through our website, ftc.gov, and through other agencies and organizations. That consumer complaint system now has about 7 million consumer complaints in it from the last 5 years alone. 7 million consumer complaints. Last year alone, we took in 1.8 million consumer complaints. About half of those concerned fraud. When you look at those complaints, one thing that strikes you immediately is the number of complaints that we receive from elderly consumers. And the number has been going up each of the past 3 years. In 2009, about 10% of our complaints came from consumers 60 and over. In 2010, it was up to 12%. In 2011, it was up to 15% of the complaints. So each year, it's gone up. And of course, that's a troubling trend. We'd like to know more about that. A few months ago, the FTC launched a pilot project, a peer counseling pilot project with the AARP Foundation. The idea was to find out more about some of these victims. I know a couple of our speakers today have talked about focusing on the victims. We wanted to do the same thing. We wanted to focus on the victims, find out what their experiences were. So we entered into this pilot project with AARP Foundation, a very small project, as you'll understand in a minute. But the results already, the information that we have seen already from the consumers that our counselors have talked to is sobering and troubling. And I just wanted to relate to you some of the things we're hearing about. So remember, these are people who, what's happened is consumers have filed complaints with the Federal Trade Commission. They have agreed to have their names turned over to one of our peer counselors who are employed by AARP under contract with us. And these peer counselors have then called the consumers back and spoken with them about their experiences. And here's some of the things that we've seen in the reports we received in just the last 3 months or so. First of all, our counselors report that consumers reported participating in, and these are older consumers, phony sweepstakes, foreign lotteries, grandparent scams, timeshare buybacks, reverse mortgage scams, affinity investment fraud, and fake checks. These are the most common they reported. Grandparent scams, basically people calling and claiming to be a grandchild or somehow related to the senior who took the call, emanated from places like Australia, Barbados, Canada, Costa Rica, Honduras, Las Vegas, Nevada obviously, Peru, and the UK, and most frequently Jamaica. And I know we heard about Jamaica this morning in the tape that we saw this morning. But many of our victims reported also receiving calls from Jamaica. Consumers, again, older consumers frequently reported instances of threats and general harassment when they discontinued tried to cut off dealing with folks who were calling them on the phone and contacting them. In one case, the victim reported he was called 28 times in one day and repeatedly threatened with physical violence if he didn't continue sending money in response to these calls. Again, these are older consumers. A common theme that we began to see, particularly in the last month or so of calls, is consumers who are telling us that the con artists first called them about one thing, they responded by paying some money, and then within a matter of weeks, they began to receive more and more calls about different kinds of scams. So once they were hooked, they kept getting more calls and were targeted repeatedly over and over again. I know many of you have dealt with this area, know that's a problem. In terms of financial losses, so we've only spoken with about 1,000 consumers in this small pilot project so far in the past 3 or 4 months. About 200 of them gave us information on their financial losses. And this, too, is staggering in some ways. It's truly staggering. Of the 200 who talked to us, they reported, and this is just 200 consumers in a couple of months, they reported over almost $6 million in financial losses. $6 million among 200 consumers in just a couple of months. An average about $30,000 per consumer who told us about losing money. That's money that is hard-earned money. It's money that none of these folks can afford to lose. Here are some of the observations from our counselors in response to these calls. They said that many victims needed to talk about their losses. They needed to share their shame and disappointment for having participated in their own demise. Consequently, our counselors reported calls are emotional, and while they often last half an hour, many of them go over several hours in time while our counselors talk to consumers. For many victims, the financial hit was significant. Some could no longer remain in their homes. Others had lost their retirement savings and are now trying frantically to reenter the job market. And these are folks who are 60, 70, in some cases older. We realized that not only did we need to talk to them about the scams that they had dealt with, but we needed to begin talking about how to deal with debt reduction issues, credit counseling issues, other things that you would typically deal with consumers who are having other kinds of financial problems. We needed to provide that information to these consumers as well. And this is an interesting one that our counselors reported. Family relationships among these folks who've been defrauded were often broken beyond repair as a result of the fraud. While some families rallied around and supported the victim, a more common response on the part of family members is anger, blame, and a deterioration of trust. And these are folks who, frankly, should be supporting victims, but of course they don't know how to respond. They're struggling with how to respond. So let's talk about response briefly, both at the FTC and among the things that we can do. So as I said, the FTC is a law enforcement agency, and we're proud of the cases we have filed. A number of our cases have involved targeting scams that particularly affect consumers. We filed, I know this morning somebody talked about mortgage fraud. We filed about 36 cases in the past couple of years against mortgage fraud schemes in which people promised to keep consumers in their homes, but in fact, in many instances, they ultimately lost their homes. We have filed multiple prize promotions cases, and prize promotions are one of the major kinds of scams we see, particularly targeting older consumers. In fact, we did some analysis recently where we looked at our database that I was just mentioning a few minutes ago, and about 57% of all the prize promotion scams that we heard about came from consumers who were at least 60, were reported to us by consumers who are 60 years old, and 37% of the prize promotion scam reports that came to us were from consumers over 70 years old. 37% out of 100% of all the complaints. So it's a huge percentage of the complaints. We filed a variety of cases. One that I'm particularly proud of because it also involves the U.S. Attorney's Office and shows what can be done with collaboration between civil and criminal law enforcement, is the United States versus Bezzaretti. So this was a case that was actually done originally by the FTC in about 2006, somewhere in that range. The individuals calling elderly consumers primarily, offering phony prizes, non-existent prizes, get investments, a variety of things, getting literally millions of dollars out of consumers. We eventually were able to shut Mr. Bezzaretti's operation down and get some money back from him at the FTC. But that wasn't enough, of course. Mr. Bezzaretti was still out there. He was still in public. There's no reason to think he wouldn't start it again. Fortunately, with the help of the U.S. Attorney's Office in Los Angeles and the U.S. Department of Justice, recently we were able to obtain a conviction for Mr. Bezzaretti. A conviction, and when the judge heard the case, here's what the judge said about Mr. Bezzaretti and his activities. The judge characterized the case and Mr. Bezzaretti as cold, calculating, and callous. He proceeded to convict Mr. Bezzaretti to 9 years in jail. 9 years in jail for ripping off consumers. Now, it doesn't seem like a lot, but believe me, that's a real success given that there was a time it was hard to get justice to even take these things seriously. Other kinds of scams I could talk about, but I know my time is short. I've talked briefly about the counseling effort that we engage in at the FTC with AARP. I hope we can do more of that in the future. Our purpose is to provide peer counseling. Our purpose is to work more closely with victims because clearly it's not enough just to prosecute the case. We need to think about what's happening with the victims, need to spend more time talking to them. People who need to spend half an hour to an hour on the phone talking to you are clearly people who need more attention than they're getting from the criminal justice system and from the law enforcement system. Some other things that we've been doing. As I said, we do consumer education. We spend a lot of time dealing with health fraud and other kinds of fraud, trying to educate consumers about the problems. We've been working on some train-the-trainer type programs. But all of these things, they require one particular thing. They require coordination and cooperation. More than anything else, the way the FTC succeeds and the way that all of us succeed is through coordination and cooperation. So in closing, I just wanted to mention a couple things that I'd like to see us do more of. I think these things work. When I think back over my 20-some years protecting consumers, senior consumers, they're the kinds of things that I was most proud of. First of all, I'd like to see us do more work in the area of peer counseling. I'd like to see us be willing to devote more time to peer counseling, whether that's through reaching out the way the FTC does or through creating 800 numbers and opportunities for consumers to call in to talk. Secondly, and I think that's part we need to identify partners to do that. We need to work more closely on that. Secondly, I'd like to see us do more in the area of teaching others how to deal with elder abuse. Let's face it, there simply are not enough people out there who know how to do it. We've heard a lot about that already today. I can tell you that I feel like we struggle constantly to get judges, prosecutors, and others to pay attention to the problem. The FTC, it's a problem that frankly we should spend more time with. And in my sense is there's simply not enough training out there for elder abuse. That requires cooperation, elder abuse prevention. And then third, I think we need to do a lot more about handling complaints. We need to do more in terms of dealing with the complaints that come in. I talked about the FTC getting 1.8 million complaints from consumers. We share those with law enforcement. We talk with other law enforcement about them. But frankly, we simply don't do enough. We don't do enough sharing of complaints. We don't do enough sharing of the information that's coming into us to try to identify and target more carefully the frauds that are occurring, particularly frauds that are targeting consumers. So it'd be great if we could work more in the area of sharing complaints. And what I just want to emphasize in closing is that none of these things can happen without significant cooperation among all of us in this room and, frankly, those who are watching and throughout the country. It really is critical that we share and coordinate and cooperate. So with that, I'll say thank you and appreciate your time.
Our final panelist almost doesn't require introduction. She's the Director of Lifelong Justice, an initiative that she founded with other leaders in the elder justice field. She is a senior scholar at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. And given her significant contributions to the field of elder justice, she was awarded the prestigious MacArthur Fellowship in 2011. It is my great pleasure and privilege to introduce M.T. Connolly.
I think the best thing I did while I was at the Department of Justice was to recruit the wonderful Andy Mao.
All right.
It's a great honor to be here at the White House today and to be part of this amazing panel. My Uncle Ned, who was a Franciscan monk, said at the time of my parents' wedding when he had to give a talk, he said, when I got here, only God and I knew what I was going to say. Now only God knows. So I'm not sure what's going to come out here. I wanted to start with sort of that everyone has a story. And I think all of us who work in this field know that everyone has a story, and often each of us has a story every few weeks. Some of you know I'm writing or more agonizing about writing a book about elder abuse. And so I was looking for literature about elder abuse in the LGBT community. And there's no data. There's no data on almost anything. Certainly there's no data on that. So I called the wonderful Mary Toomey and I said, Mary, what are you seeing? What kinds of patterns are you seeing? And she had talked to the Fatality Review team, one of the ones like Ricker was just discussing now in San Francisco. And they said that they had seen a pattern of much younger men, both financially and physically abusing much older men. And so I thought about that and started to write about it. And then my son Nathan had a lung collapse and ended up having surgery recently. And so he and I were sharing a hospital room with an older man who was quite confused. He was in his late 80s, and he had a much younger partner. And he was on the phone at night with his much younger partner saying, honey, I don't know where all the passwords are to all the accounts. I think I've given them all to you already. And I just got a stomach ache thinking about what Mary had said. But it also gave me a really strong sense of, the complicated balance, because he seemed like a very devoted younger partner and was handling the case management. And on the other hand, there was this really complicated red flag. And so I told the nurse, I said, I couldn't forgive myself if I didn't report this and ask you to report it. But on the other hand, it needs some looking into. So in any event, that's everyone has a story, and often everyone has a story every week. My task today is to talk about the high cost of elder abuse and how a modest investment of resources could both mitigate the suffering of millions of people and also save billions of dollars. And really beginning to get a better handle on the cost, which we also have not quantified and haven't even really begun to quantify, is part of fashioning a response. And so I think it's critical that we put it on the table. I'd like to start with 3 case examples. When we talk about financial exploitation, we usually think about theft or fraud. In fact, greed drives all sorts of elder abuse, and all sorts of elder abuse wreaks not only human suffering, but also has a huge economic implication, often draining countless billions from public programs, financial institutions, nonprofits, businesses, employers, charities, families, and older people themselves. First example. A video made by the Office for Victims of Crime features a 96-year-old woman named Miss Mary who lived with her grandson and his wife in their Florida trailer home. First, they stole her burial payments, and they treated her like a servant. Then, one night, in a drunken rage, her grandson sexually assaulted her for numerous hours. She survived, but she never lived independently again and spent her last 3 years in nursing homes and hospitals, penniless, with Medicare and Medicaid footing the bill. That early financial exploitation turned out to have been the canary in the coal mine, but no one heard it. Neglect, too, is often driven by greed, such as when adult children withhold needed care from their parents. Why? Because they don't want to deplete their assets that they hope to inherit. This, too, is a form of exploitation. Neglect in an individual case is tragic. Systemic neglect can be catastrophic. We heard from Mr. West earlier about the Hauser case that billed Medicare and Medicaid and then pocketed the money instead of providing care for frail residents. That's fraud. Cathedral Rock, which was a Missouri nursing home chain that was also prosecuted by colleagues and former colleagues of Andy's and mine, neglected numerous residents so severely that they suffered malnutrition, pressure ulcers that exposed bones, gangrene requiring numerous amputations, sepsis, injuries, and deaths. Not only did the neglect in that case lead to untold torment, but it also increased the residents' needs for acute care and intensive care and long-term care, causing numerous avoidable hospital readmissions. The result, again, a mammoth drain on Medicaid, Medicare, and private resources. We don't think of financial exploitation as causing health problems, but as Mark and Laura have pointed out today, it does. Why? Because it triggers a downward spiral from which older victims often no longer have the reserves to recover, as in the example of Sherry Kaplan's mother, the case that Laura cited earlier. That's also what happened with 86-year-old Clarence Peterson, who was living independently when a younger woman approached him at a grocery store and said in 2008, "Don't I know you?" 2 months later, they were married in Reno. Soon she had $150,000 of his money. When he discovered the scam, he was devastated and moved into an assisted living facility where he spent almost 4 years. Page prosecuted the woman who exploited not just Peterson, but several other victims as well. And just by the way, Page told me last night that she was in jail until just recently, and she's already back at it. Clarence Peterson's family contacted Page 3 weeks ago to thank her again for vindicating his rights and to tell her that Mr. Peterson died on May 22nd. These aren't isolated examples. The recent phone surveys, like the one in New York that Mark talked about, and also another phone survey that's national, have uncovered an epidemic of elder financial exploitation. And those surveys can't even capture those at greatest risk. People who can't answer or don't have a phone, people who are too scared to talk, people who live in facilities, and those who have dementia. It turns out, as Laura was discussing this morning, that with age, financial capacity often wanes. Even before dementia is diagnosed, in the early and often undetected stages of cognitive impairment, older people are exquisitely vulnerable to financial exploitation. Scammers bank on this and target older people accordingly. We urgently need research to help us understand how to more effectively prevent the problem. We also need research to illuminate the ways in which financial abuse is perceived and manifests itself differently among different racial and ethnic groups. Only by better understanding the many manifestations of the problem are we going to be better able to prevent it. What we do know is that elder financial exploitation touches the lives of millions of people of all ages, both older people and the younger people who care about and for them. And the problem is growing. As the 77 million baby boomers age, the populations at greatest risk also are on the rise. People 85 and over, about half of whom who have some cognitive impairment, are the fastest growing segment of the population, and already 5.4 million people have dementia. And we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg. The New York Prevalence Study found that for every one case of elder financial exploitation that comes to light, another 44 go undetected. So we need to begin creating collaborations to measure the cost. And we can begin to get a sense of the economic dimensions of this multifaceted problem when we consider the following. And I'll apologize in advance for giving you a laundry list, but it's just sort of mind-boggling when we start to line them all up. So Mark Lax and colleagues a few years ago did a study in New York showing that elder abuse victims, including victims of financial exploitation, are 4 times more likely to be admitted to a nursing home. That has enormous implications for Medicare and Medicaid. Providers that bill public programs for care they don't provide commit fraud. But that fraud also exploits consumers who for decades have paid their hard-earned tax dollars to fund Medicare and Medicaid, only to be deprived of the services they're entitled to when they need them the most, and they're the most vulnerable and the least able to fight back. There are consequential costs too, like in the Cathedral Rock case. So understaffing and thus neglect at nursing homes results in a 22% increase in unnecessary hospitalizations. Why? Because neglect leads to serious health problems that require higher levels and longer-term care. Financial exploitation robs victims of Clarence Peterson of an estimated $2.9 billion a year. And these cases raise tremendously complex issues that require a balancing of autonomy and safety. Often, they're born of just crushing loneliness, and often they're preventable. In Utah, financial exploitation was found to cost elders and businesses and government entities some $77 million a year, and that's the most conservative estimate. That's just one state, and it's the state with the youngest population in the country. That financial exploitation also pushed victims into higher rates of dependence on Medicaid, which just makes sense, because if you wipe out someone's assets, they're more likely to rely on Medicaid, but also pushed them into dual eligibility for both Medicare and Medicaid. It also found that the more incapacitated the victim, the more money they lost. Older people whose assets are wiped out rely on public housing, or are more likely to rely on public housing and become wards of the state, further draining stretched safety programs at the state level. Financial institutions, as a result of financial exploitation, lose deposits when elders' accounts are wrongfully depleted and are drawn into costly investigations and controversies. And when bequests intended for charitable organizations and cultural organizations are pilfered, those losses deplete funds intended for the public good and have a ripple effect as well. Abusive guardianships squander scarce court and family resources. Conversely, effective guardianships and appropriate alternatives to guardianship avoid unnecessary institutionalization and save Medicaid dollars. There are unquantified losses as the result of power of attorney, will, and rep payee fraud, another issue that we haven't begun to get a handle on. And then there are the ripple effects again. Exploited victims who lose their independence end up relying on, if they're not institutionalized, if they don't go to the hospital or to the nursing home, they're much more likely to end up relying on informal or formal caregivers at home. As a result, those caregivers, we know now about the huge cost and toll, the health toll of caregiving. Those caregivers often miss work, lose jobs, and suffer serious health problems and mental health problems themselves. In other words, financial exploitation also has devastating ripple effects through the generations of families. What's the total cost? Surely many billions. We urgently need research on this issue and better ways to prevent the problem. So we need you in the financial services community to help us and to teach us. Elder abuse, neglect, and exploitation is a moral blight with a huge price tag. What we know about it lags 40 years behind child abuse and 20 years behind domestic violence. We urgently need the efforts of the intergovernmental bodies like the Coordinating Council that Secretary Sebelius announced this morning, which is really a tremendously exciting announcement and can do a lot of good. In addition, the financial industry can play a critical role in preventing and addressing this problem through education, reporting, putting in place safeguards, early alerts, and the type of pioneering elder justice philanthropy and private-public partnerships with which Wells Fargo has led the way this morning, along with Don Blandon's good work. You know, the costs are hard to measure. The savings of prevention are even more difficult to measure, but it's the best defense. And elder abuse is a largely preventable problem. It's a problem where a modest investment of resources could prevent untold suffering and yield vast cost savings. We've spent countless billions of dollars to lengthen life. It's time now to seriously invest in assuring the improved safety, well-being, and economic security in the years we've gained. Thank you.
With the time we have left, we obviously want to invite any questions that you guys have for the panelists, but we also want to invite you, to the extent that you want to highlight best practices that you have in your own communities, or at your banks, or at your local community coalitions. One of the topics that hasn't been talked about are the financial abuse specialist teams, which a number of communities have developed. Does anybody in the audience belong or participate in a FAST team? Laura, would you mind talking a little bit about that? Or Mary?
Sure, what would you like to hear?
Well, basically, what are FAST teams, and how do they work, and how do they function in responding to financial abuse?
So I am certainly not an expert on FAST teams, but I have had the pleasure of being on a number of FAST teams in California. And of course, everybody knows the acronym stands for Financial Abuse Specialist Teams. Generally, they are, if the county council allows for it, public-private partnerships between professionals in the private industry who work in the areas who work in financial services, real estate, title companies, and others, joining forces with community nonprofits and local leaders from law enforcement, adult protective, ombudsman. And they work up cases, usually complex financial abuse cases, together, and they have an amazing impact in ways that those agencies doing that work in silos just doesn't have. It's much better for the victim. How was that? I actually thought FAST teams had something to do with, speedy cars when I first got into it, so I was kind of...
Perfect. How long has your FAST team been in place?
The San Francisco FAST team has been around for at least a decade or more, and Orange County, I think, about the same.
Okay, thank you very much. Do you have a question? Oh, please.
Hi, I'm Joe Snyder from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I'm the APS director in Philadelphia. And I started with the program with Wachovia, when it was Wachovia, on a fraud prevention program with APS and Wachovia. And we started in Philadelphia, and it spread to the 23 states that Wachovia was in. And during that time, we stopped $2 million from going out the door, and we saved over $62 million in assets protected. That led to a breakfast in Philadelphia by the mayor on a conversation on financial exploitation. And we started a task force, and I have a task force right now with the police department, deputy police commissioner, district attorney's office, vice president of a local bank, and legal service provider in Philadelphia. And we've done a lot of cross-training, and we're about to do a public awareness campaign, and we also share and work on cases together, and what's led to a number of prosecutions and recoveries.
Great. Well, just a follow-up question. How was it developing the relationship between your APS and Wachovia? I mean, was that an easy process where you're smiling? So I
Yeah,
assume that
my former partner is right next to me. So it was pretty easy. I walked up and I knocked on a lot of doors in Philadelphia, and she was the only one who answered. And so I went in and I said, you know, you should be doing this. This is what's happening in APS. This is what's happening in financial exploitation in the world, and we can do great things together, and this will work. And she had her lawyers and the rest of her company vet, this is Linda Mill, by the way, vet everything that I said, and we said, okay, let's start it in Philadelphia. And we spent 5 days training the local network, and it spread, and they had actually a dedicated elder abuse unit. And one of the things we were proudest of is that in the 23 states that they're in, every APS worker knew the names of the people in Wachovia's elder abuse unit. And it was actually really easy. There was no problems. And I think, you know, there shouldn't be any problems today. It's already worked. We've done it before. This should be across the country.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Linda, did you want to add anything about the working relationship?
Sure. I think the most important thing in the financial services world is to, you know, start out slow. We did a pilot in Philadelphia. It was very successful. We expanded it to Pennsylvania and then across the footprint. And the real key, as Joe said, was having dedicated folks in the fraud investigations unit. That's where our elder abuse team was. Because while APS was out there working with the client, we were protecting the funds. And I think that's probably the biggest thing that I would urge financial institutions to do today is many are out there doing great work of making the referrals, but not everybody is doing the investigation and protecting the assets while APS is doing its investigation. So we need to help stop the bleeding and use our resources and our expertise to do that. And if I could just kind of divert, after I left Wachovia, I actually now work full-time for the Institute on Protective Services at Temple University, which is funded by the Pennsylvania Department of Aging. And what we're doing is trying to help boost our law enforcement in the state of Pennsylvania, and I heard talk about the need for forensic accountants out there. I'm a certified fraud examiner, and I help law enforcement throughout the state put together those cases. So we need that assistance as well for law enforcement. And I was happy to know just yesterday driving here, I got a phone call that yesterday in Pennsylvania, a judge ruled to give a 92-year-old woman who was financially exploited by her 62-year-old adopted son, and yes, she adopted him at 62, $200,000 in punitive damages. So it was a real win yesterday.
That's great. Yes.
I think one of the also important partnerships is with civil legal attorneys.
I'm sorry, could you tell us who you
Yes,
are?
I'm sorry. I'm Joyce Solomon. I'm the director of the Weinberg Center at the
Great.
Heber Home.
Welcome.
We run an emergency shelter for elder abuse victims. But one of the important partnerships is also with civil legal attorneys when the criminal justice system can't, for various reasons, prosecute cases that civil, especially attorneys, work to do screening of their clients so that they're talking to their adult clients before they're distributing their assets or making wills or creating other financial documents, that we have to educate lawyers as well who really are not aware of undue influence and other things that are causing that they're kind of unknowingly participating in financial exploitations of their clients. So these are really important partnerships that we're working on to train lawyers about this issue.
It's great. Hopefully with the Missing Link project, we'll be able to make some strides in that regard as well. Charles, we were talking at lunch a little bit about sort of the FTC also doing some work with civil legal aid societies in terms of training. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, thank you, Andy. I know we talked about the Missing Link. This morning we announced the Missing Link initiative, which involves legal services. The FTC has been working with legal services offices and attorneys since about 2009. We found it to be a tremendous resource because they are oftentimes some of the first individuals who see problems arising, and because they deal on a one-on-one basis with these folks. And what we've been working with them to do is a couple different things. First of all, encourage them to make referrals to law enforcement when they spot patterns and problems. And secondly, we've been working with them to provide additional training to them on various consumer protection and consumer law issues that to help them do a better job of representing their clients. And the result of those efforts have, I think, really been beneficial both for the FTC in terms of our targeting of law enforcement problems, but also for legal service attorneys, because it takes a little bit of the load off them. It gives them new materials to use with their clients, and frankly, it gives them something else to point their clients to in terms of another resource to work with.
That's great. Thank you. A question or comment?
Bob Roush, Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, Texas. Since Mark mentioned Don Blandon a moment ago, through a grant with the Investor Protection Institute, we've had the good fortune to put on programs all over the country that help healthcare providers learn to screen for these vulnerabilities that make elders so highly at much greater risk of financial exploitation than otherwise might be the case. And so I think that it bears mentioning that there are 20 federally funded geriatric education centers involved in this, area health education centers. These are all DHHS programs. The state securities offices have been invaluable in this. Investor educators present with clinical educators. We've put on 43 CME programs around the country. We've reached 3,000 healthcare providers. We hope to do that much more this coming year. We've got a web-based version coming out. So it's an example of a collaboration between federal, state, local people in the healthcare industry to try to get at some of this. We can't do it all by ourselves, and so again, with everything that I've heard today, I'm emboldened, I think, and encouraged to know that we're, I think, on the right track now.
Thank you very much. You raised an interesting point regarding state regulators. I know that the FINRA Investor Education Foundation has been doing a lot of work in developing toolkits and materials for that. I believe Jerry Walsh is here. Jerry, would you mind sharing with the audience some of the programs and materials that you guys have developed?
I'm happy to, and thank you, Andy. My name is Jerry Walsh. I'm the president of the FINRA Investor Education Foundation. And what Andy's referring to is our investor protection campaign that we've been running. The mission of the FINRA Foundation is to help Americans get the tools and resources they need to make financially sound decisions throughout their lifespan, and we focus on underserved and vulnerable audiences. The Investor Protection Campaign takes a multi-pronged approach, and we've been partnering with state securities regulators, with AARP and the AARP Foundation, with local crime prevention and victim advocacy groups, really to do a number of things, to train consumers to recognize the persuasion tactics that con criminals use. Understanding what a particular fraud du jour is helpful to a point, but understanding the psychology that goes behind how those con criminals really catch their prey, that's key. And just knowing about it can help inoculate you against it to a certain degree. So we have DVDs, we have brochures that we're happy to make available to anybody in this room that wants to distribute them. As I said, we've been partnering with state organizations and others, but one of the more interesting things that we're doing, we haven't yet reached out to attorneys, but we're going to. That's on our list. But we are working with, well, I'm an attorney, and I forgot it. No, I love lawyers, I do. But we've been doing the crime prevention work first. So we've been doing this sort of in modulated stages. And we've been working with federal agencies as well as the state agencies. So we've had a great deal of fabulous partnership with particularly the Securities and Exchange Commission, but we've also been reaching out to other federal agencies. So thanks for the shout out. And if anybody's interested, saveandinvest.org, or you can contact me, Jerry.Walsh at finra.org. Jerry is Gerri, Walsh, W-A-L-S-H, and FINRA is F as in Frank, I, N as in Nancy, R-A.org. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a question that we received online from Stephen Baker, who asks, what can prosecutors do when financial exploitation is not criminalized under a state statute? I don't know. Paige, do you have any thoughts on that? What options we have?
Many states don't have specific elder financial exploitation statutes, so we file those charges under our theft statutes. You can commit theft by lying to someone, and if they give you money based on the lies you tell them, that's a crime and that's a chargeable crime. You can commit theft by taking money from someone without their permission or by embezzling it from them. If you legally have authority to have the money and then you use it for your own benefit rather than for the elders. So all of those forms of elder financial exploitation can be charged under the regular theft statutes in all states.
Great. Thank you. Yes.
I forgot to mention one of our most important partners, and that's NAPSA, Kathleen Quinn and Joe Snyder. We couldn't have done these programs without them, and so I want to make sure they get acknowledged.
Yes, please. And then the two women up front.
Thank you. In California,
I'm sorry, can you introduce yourself?
Oh, Lisa Narenberg with the California Elder Justice Coalition. We did a pretty intensive blueprint development process in California, and there were a number of ideas that came up in relation to elder financial abuse. I just wanted to mention that I don't think we've talked too much about here today, and that's the need for better restitution recovery. I think there's been this idea that perpetrators are all deadbeats and there's really no point in trying to go after restitution. But I think that there have been some really creative attempts to do that. OVC has taken a look at the issue. I know Joe's program has done that as well. Some of the elder courts that we're starting to see around the country are starting to emphasize restitution. So I think we can't let perps off the hook. Paige mentioned also that victims of financial abuse don't usually get compensation. I think that's an area that we need to be looking at. Also mental health services. The peer counseling program I think is really terrific, but I think victims often need more intensive kinds of mental health treatment, especially from catastrophic losses. And just, I really want to emphasize the focus on victim services, and victims of scams often need, in addition to restitution recovery or advocacy, but advocacy with creditors, advocacy with housing providers, and lots of needs that haven't been addressed.
Great. Thank you very much. There were two folks up here. If you could introduce yourselves for folks in the audience.
Certainly I will. Hi, I'm Judge Patricia Banks from the Circuit Court of Cook County, Chicago, Illinois, and I'm the judicial link. What we've done in Cook County, starting last year, the Chief Judge Timothy Evans appointed me to preside over the new division in its elder law and miscellaneous remedies. And that division has as its goal and objective to handle, we have 10 judges throughout our system. We have 16 divisions in the Circuit Court of Cook County. And all the cases dealing with elder abuse and neglect will be under my jurisdiction, but we'll have cases being heard, 3 judges sitting in the criminal division and dealing with a lot of the best practices I've been hearing today. We're going to be incorporating those in our court. We have a criminal component as well as a civil component. We have an elder justice center, and we also have a mediation piece. And it's too much to tell in a short time, but we do have this going on. We're going to kick it off on July 2nd. And again, we're really looking forward to doing this.
Well, thank you very much. On the topic of state courts, I mean, we have Brenda Euchert here from the National Center of State Courts, who's also developed some toolkits for both prosecutors and state courts. Brenda, do you want to talk a little bit about the toolkits that you guys have developed?
Thank you. Yes, we have 2 toolkits, one for prosecutors, one for courts. I have to thank Page, Candy Heisler, and Aaron Baldwin for helping us with the prosecution piece. Since we are courts, we don't know that much about prosecution. These, if technology works as it should, will all be available on our Center for Elders and the Courts website tomorrow, eldersandcourts.org. Both of these kits are designed so that you can download the entire product. You can also download checklists, forms, victim surveys, all kinds of tools. You can download it as a fillable PDF, or you can download it as a Word. So everything is created for you to take back, put in your local terminology, enter your community resources, and we really want you to use these toolkits. And again, if all goes well, you'll find them at www.eldersandcourts.org tomorrow.
Great, thank you very much. There's a question, I'm sorry, there's a woman in the second row here who had a question. Do you still, or comment? Ma'am? Oh, no, oh, no. Either.
Thanks so much. My name is Jelaine Gunther. I'm from the state of Utah. In Utah, we analyze the cost of financial exploitation. We're releasing today our 2010 study based on analyzing the supported cases for adult protective services. What's interesting is the average person in Utah loses that's a victim of financial exploitation, loses $85,000. If that person has dementia, it increases 50% to $128,000. If you're looking at a perpetrator who's a child, it jumps from $85,000 to over $125,000. One of the reasons why we've done this is to show our policymakers on the local level that this is important, because they're inundated with lots of different agencies and entities that are requesting money. The second reason why we've done this is we wanted to figure out how are perpetrators accessing this money. Just like a police officer, if there is a neighborhood burglaries, they want to figure out how this has happened so they can prevent it. And so we've analyzed some of the tactics that perpetrators are using and then coming up with tools and then warning seniors about that. One of the tools we've created, which is the first in the nation, is a third-party monitoring over bank accounts so that people can have a second pair of eyes watching a senior's account, but as view only. And one of the things we've done is we've warned seniors about some of the things perpetrators are doing in our book that we give away for free to Utah seniors. And then we've also, for people who don't like to read books, we've also created the first infographic on financial exploitation, warning seniors with statistics and graphics on what it is and how they can prevent. We'll also be releasing that at the end of the day today.
The survey that you mentioned before, is that publicly available?
The study?
Yes.
It will be tomorrow.
Wonderful.
So, yes.
Excellent.
Thanks.
That sounds like it's going to be quite something. There is a question in the back. I think this should be our last question. Okay. Are they coming?
Hi, I'm Mary Tucker. I'm with Wells Fargo Advisors. I'm in the law department, and I'm I work with a group that deals directly with our financial advisors who are calling and asking, what do I do? Do we restrict this account or not? Do we let the senior take the money? Do we let the power of attorney wipe this person out? Can we restrict this account? And I guess the question I've got that we get over and over again is, once we report it to Adult Protective Services, you know, we know that there is an art of delay and, you know, creating opportunity for APS or law enforcement to do something, but it's very hard to manage an art. It's very hard to teach people on the front line that art. We need some protection. We need something on like a protective order that is available for people who are being physically abused. We need something for people who are being financially abused. Because if we can't point to a statute, a rule, a court order, the fear of liability. I think at Wells Fargo Advisors we've done a good job of balancing, you know, the risk and the benefit there, but there are so many people on the front lines who are afraid, if I restrict this account, I'm going to be hit for treble damages, I'm going to be sued under this law or, you know, by that regulator for denying an older person their right to access their financial assets. So I'm hoping that there's some legislative relief out there beyond just the art of delay.
Thank you. We had one more Twitter question that came in, and I'll leave this to the panelists. You guys can decide which one. from Stacy Sanders. In a culture that celebrates youth, how can we protect a growing population in life's twilight? And it seems like an appropriate question to end our panel with. Anyone? Don't make me out, you MT. That seems like it's
I already assigned it to me. By having an event like this every year.
Right.
Not to mention the resources that will be spread throughout the field.
Excellent. Well, it seems like that's the perfect way to end our panel. Thank you very, very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Andy and panelists. As I promised this morning, we will give you a short break. There are a couple of additional people that I want to introduce you to. So please take a break, but come back. We'll do a short video, a couple more fabulous speakers. This is an opportunity to take your picture with Ricker Hamilton. That's, we've got 15 minutes to do it. So we'll see you back here in 15.